Welcome back to Self-Invested, where we talk about how you can do better with money. In this video, I sit down and talk with Caroline, a YouTube lifestyle vlogger, about her shared ownership experience. Now, I came across Caroline because she did a video talking about her personal experience in response to some of the negative experiences that she's seen about the scheme. I thought it would be a good idea to get her onto my channel to talk about her experience, almost to balance out some of the previous interviews that I've done, and perhaps show some of the positive aspects of the scheme and talk about how people can get the scheme to work for them if they're interested in it or if they're currently a shared owner. If you want to watch the video that I saw of Caroline, I'll provide a link to it down in the description. I'll also provide a link to her channel. Also, if you want to see any of the previous interviews that I've done with other shared owners, then I'll also provide a link to those down in the description. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you do, please give the video a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. All right, Caroline, thank you for joining me to chat about shared ownership. The reason I wanted to interview you is because I came across your video online where you talked about your personal shared ownership experience and how the scheme actually works for you. So I just wanted to almost balance out some of the other interviews that I've done, where people have had a negative experience of the scheme. And I wanted to sort of find out how you were able to get it to work for you and possibly like share those tips with other people as well. So the first thing I was going to ask was, what attracted you to shared ownership?
Okay, so when I mentioned in my video that it was around 2006 that I started to look, but I actually ended up buying in August of 2007. And the reason I was attracted to it is because at the time I was on quite a low income, and it was the only way to get on the housing ladder. They didn't have things like Help to Buy at the time. Mm-hmm. So that was really the only scheme that was available to people on low incomes to buy.
Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't have been able to buy without it. That was like the only option you had, really.
Yeah.
Okay. And
not in London anyway.
No. What did you end up buying, and for how much?
So I bought a 2-bed top floor Victorian terrace flat. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Do you know Tottenham much?
I know it. It's Haringey Borough, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know they got a lot of regeneration around that way.
Yeah. So it was between Stamford Hill and Tottenham. So what they call South Tottenham. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's where I ended up buying, and it had a garden, luckily, even though it was a top floor flat. So the garden was split between 2 flats.
And what was a Victorian build? So it wasn't new build then?
No.
It was a convert. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And so what were your costs? How much did it cost you? And how much of it did you actually buy?
Yeah, so it was on for 165, and I bought half of it.
Okay, cool.
So for 82.5.
And what were your monthly costs roughly?
So it was about £400 a month for the rent bit.
Okay.
And then 525 for the mortgage.
Okay, so not too bad, just under 1,000. And what did you have a service charge to pay as well, in addition to that?
Yeah, so on an annual basis, it keeps going up, but it was around £500 a year at the time.
Okay.
It's now about 850.
Okay, that's not too bad, from 500 to 850 from 2007. That doesn't sound terrible. It's probably because it's an older build as well.
Yeah,
because I know it's worse for the newer builds. Yeah. So like, when you initially bought your shared ownership place, did you have a long-term plan or exit strategy? Like, did you know what you were going to do like in 10 years time or 15 years time, or did you just buy it and just play it by ear?
So no, I didn't have an exit plan. I started off with just, I'm so glad to be on the housing ladder. It was only a few years later that I'm really sad. I'm obsessed with this program called it's on BBC Two. I haven't watched it in ages, but it's auction. It's like an auction program.
Homes Under the Hammer.
That's it. Yeah.
I think that's everyone's secret favorite.
Yeah. So I became obsessed with that, and then I started to think, how can I use leverage in my house to get out of this scheme, and then somehow become a property developer. I never did, but it was kind of what sort of like sowed the seeds of how am I going to get out of this scheme.
And okay, so how did you get out the scheme? So you had 50% ownership. I'm guessing you got out the scheme by staircasing to 100%, or did you sell your property?
No, I staircased to 100%.
And yeah, how did you go about doing that, and when did you do that?
So this was back in, I ended up staircasing in 2012, or it all completed around 2012. And how I did it was I got in touch with a mortgage broker who I used originally for the purchase of the house. Mm-hmm. Or the flat, sorry. And he like talks me through the process, and it was basically you need to earn X amount in order to staircase to 100%. And you need X deposit. At the time, I had, I was testing my memory now because that I couldn't find in my paperwork, but I had about £9,000 from the increase in the value of the property, and then I think I had to put down about 20,000 of my own money, so it's about 29,000
as an additional deposit. Yeah. Okay. So, and that was because with your salary alone, you weren't able to afford sort of the increase in value.
Yeah.
That additional 50%.
Yeah. Also, at the time, if you're probably too young for this, but there was a recession. Yeah. In 2008. Yeah. So a whole criteria changed from the 5% deposit that I put down to they were asking they were asking for a higher deposit amount. So I can't actually remember what the amount was. I put down 29%. Okay. So that's basically what happened.
Okay, so the minimum, so it was more, the issue was more the deposit. The minimum deposit you could put down was 29. You might have been able to get a bigger mortgage, but it's because, okay, cool. And yeah, so you bought it for 165 in 2007. What was the value of it by 2012?
180.
180.
Yeah,
that's not bad. That's not a major increase.
No.
But I'm guessing that's mainly because of the housing crash in 2008, right?
Yeah.
Do you? I guess it's difficult for you to say because we don't know what the value of your property would have been without that crash. But do you have a sense, like, I guess you'll know based on how easy it was for you to staircase to 100%. If it was very comfortable, then maybe if the property's value was higher, you might have still been able to do it. But I guess if it was a bit of a stretch to buy that 50%, I guess my question is, like, if there wasn't that crash and house prices had increased more than they had over that period, do you think you would have still been able to staircase to 100%?
That is a really good question. I think at the time, well, so a couple of things. I benefited from the fact that when I originally was you sort of do this bidding process when you initially want to buy a shared ownership, and you have to meet certain criteria. So you have to be on low income, you have to live in the area, and you have to I can't remember what the other criteria was, but there's a few criteria before you could actually buy. And so when I said I wanted to buy it, it was 2000 and late 2006. But for some reason they took forever to process all the paperwork. So it ended up being August before I ended up buying. So in that time, the house prices had actually increased. So I really should have paid 180 because they should have done a valuation, a second valuation, but they didn't.
This is in 2012, you're saying? In August?
2008, they should have done a second valuation because the prices had increased. So that flat, I should have bought it for 180 and not 165.
Okay.
So yeah, the only thing I can think of is that maybe if I'd had to pay an extra 15 grand, would I have been able to afford it? Because I can't remember what the minimum deposit amount was.
Yeah.
I can't be sure.
It would have been dependent. So the mortgage, you reckon you would have been okay? Like your salary had increased enough for you to buy that additional 50%. It would have been what the deposit requirement was. Yeah. So I'm guessing then between when you initially bought that property, bought 50% of that property, to when you bought 100% of the property in 2012, you must have had quite a big increase in salary, because if you're going from 50% ownership to 100% ownership, I've done like an example to show people what it looks like, and you pretty much need your salary to double in order to be able to do that. So is that what happened? Did
So
you?
it didn't double. I
Yeah.
started off on 30K. And then by the time I staircased, I was on like 45.
Okay. Okay.
So not a
So
massive
50% increase.
yeah.
Did you do anything else to help you fund that staircase as well?
Yeah. So I mentioned in the video that I had roommates. So and the reason I always wanted a 2-bed flat was because I just wasn't sure what would happen with the economy, and it was always in my mind that it's best to have a second option if you can rent out a room. And I think it's still the same now, that you can rent out a room if you're living there.
So it's like
Somebody
having
did
a
ask
lodger.
me, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Now in the lease, it does say that you're not allowed to sublet without asking, which I did ask. But they never wrote back. And this is another thing that when it came to converting my mortgage, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but this is just indicative of how terrible the housing association is with their admin. In that you write to them and ask for things, and then they just completely ignore you. So when I was converting my mortgage to a buy-to-let, again, my solicitors wrote to them, asked them twice because you need to ask their permission to sublet the whole thing, and they never wrote back. So yeah, it's just.
Oh, so you asked, they didn't come back to you, and so you just went ahead and did it. Yeah. I guess that would be my tip to anyone that plans to sort of follow that example and sort of just get a lodger in. I think there are ways around it. I'm not sure who's best to speak to. Maybe when you're buying your property from your solicitor, you can get advice on sort of legal ways around it, because I know there's things around, if they pay towards your rent, then they might have tenant rights or something like that. But if they contribute towards like electric bills and food shopping and stuff like that, then I think that's a bit of a loophole. But it's best to maybe get advice from your solicitor when you're buying, because they can sort of talk you through the best way to do that. But yeah, just okay, so you staircased in 2012. I don't know, like, tell us about that process. Was it a straightforward process? I'm guessing from what you're saying it was a bit complicated because the housing association weren't great.
So my solicitors made it quite straightforward for me, so I personally didn't experience too many challenges. And because it's not like I was in a rush, I needed to like staircase to 100% and then move somewhere. So maybe I didn't notice that it was a long process. But I think it probably took somewhere in the region of about 6 months in total.
So it's almost similar to like buying a property again, sort of that sort of process. But I guess if you're not in a rush, you're not trying to sell, and you're going to continue living there afterwards, it's not much of an issue then. So all right, so 2012 you staircased to 100%. What did you do with the property?
So I carried on living in it until, and then by that time my then husband had moved in with me, or sorry, my then boyfriend had moved in. He moved in with me, and we lived there for about 2 years before we got married. And then in 2014 we went and bought somewhere else together, and I kept that flat. And then rented it out.
And that's where you had to sort of turn your residential mortgage into a buy-to-let mortgage, and you had to. So when you converted from a residential to a buy-to-let mortgage, you had to speak to the housing association again.
So I spoke to my solicitors. I never spoke to the housing association.
Okay, but did they have to deal with the house? Did they have to deal with the housing association? Because they own the building. They own the whole building, I'm guessing. Okay, cool. So
what the solicitors do is they write to the housing association to say, the mortgage has been converted to a buy-to-let. Do you give permission for the property to be converted into a, or for it to be the whole thing to be subletted? They wrote to them twice and had no response. It was just
even up to now.
Even till now they never responded. So my solicitor was like, well, if we have our letters to say that we did and also at the time, when in order to convert it to a buy-to-let, you had to get certain types of information because the bank requested it. So my solicitors requested it from the housing association, so they sent all of the paperwork that we needed to satisfy the bank. But the actual, like, yes, you have permission to convert.
Yeah, you didn't get that confirmation. So I've been doing a bit of reading up on this, and from what I understand, I think you should, after you staircase to 100% ownership and you own that property outright, as long as, I think you should be able to sublet it. I think there's actually, it might be the Housing Act, or there may be some law that prevents the landlord from stopping you from renting out. But I think, again, that's something you get them to speak to your solicitor about, just to make sure. But I think I think there are many, I think even in my lease, and it was, my property was never a shared ownership property, it says something about you can't sublet, but then 2 of the properties within my building are subletted, and the freeholder knows about it, and it's not an issue. So I think get advice, and as you said, write to your landlord, or get your solicitor to do it, and just make sure you have something in writing, you know, just as proof, as evidence that you've actually attempted to, or that you've actually got permission to do that. So okay, so what are your plans now with that property? Is it one thing I want to ask is, like, because it's a leasehold property, you probably have a lease on it, so what is the length of the lease? Is that something you're worried about in the long term? What are your plans with the property?
Yeah, so the lease was 125 when I got it. Okay. So how many years has that been? It's been 13 years. So what's that? Is that 17? No, 7.
There's 112 left.
Oh, 112. Okay, maths is better than mine.
Well, it was 18. It was how many years ago? It was 19 years ago.
Yeah. No, 125 and 13.
Yeah. Why 13?
13 years I've had it.
You had it 13 years?
Yeah.
You got it in 2012, you said?
No, that's the staircase.
Oh, the staircase. I was okay. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no.
So
you're right.
The lease term, it started from 2007.
Yeah, no, actually, no, you're right. I got a brand new lease
in 2012, and that was 9 years ago. So you got 116 years left on it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, so it's not something you have to worry about in the near future, I guess. And what, do you just plan to hold on to it as a buy-to-let?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about various things, you know, maybe selling it and then going to buy something else, you know, because I told you at the beginning, I had this vision of being like this property developer and having all these properties all over the place. But the realities are, I don't know if you know that the law has changed around buy-to-let. Yeah, so there's
less you can deduct against tax.
Correct. Yeah. So there's the tax is higher, the stamp duty is higher. So I'd have to go up north or somewhere where the properties were under 125, which is the stamp duty threshold. And I just don't have time for all of that. Managing properties from so far away. So you probably just hold on to that and just have it as a bit of to be honest, I don't think that's a bad shot. That's not a bad shot. I think as well, like, one thing you can look at is you've got quite a long lease length on it, but like, I think in the near future, hopefully within the next 4 years, the government's going to change the rules on lease extensions. So like, once those changes come into force, you'll be able to extend your lease to 990 years, and then you're never going to have to worry about it. It'd be almost as good as a freehold, and it can just sit there, just bringing you some passive income. So all right, so I think from our discussion, can quite clearly see that the scheme did work for you. I mean, I think the shared ownership scheme initially was created as a way for people to get a foot on the property ladder, get a percentage of it, and then staircase to 100%. I think that's becoming less and less possible, especially in London. And now it's just seen as something where you can buy a bit of a property, increase your equity share, like the value of it, and then maybe go further out and buy a place of your own 100%. But like, I really want to know what you think about the scheme now, as somebody that's used it. You know, you were a shared owner for 5 years. You've had this property for 14 years, 13 years. Like, I'm really keen to hear what you think about the scheme now. So I totally get why people were against it, because funny enough, I did participate in a study about this same thing, about the, how people have successfully managed to staircase. And in the end, actually, the majority of people were not able to staircase. And those who were able to staircase relied on the bank of mum and dad. So I get that the scheme is a trap for a lot of people, because not everyone, number one, is fortunate to have done it when I did it, which is, back in the day. Also, the fact that a series of circumstances made it so that I ended up didn't actually buying it for as much as I should have done. So in some ways I was quite lucky, but in the main, I think it is a good scheme if you're not going to do it in London.
Okay.
If you earn a London salary, do it outside of London, because I don't know how many people can actually afford to staircase. Like, basically you need to be earning like 6 figures, I think, in order to get some of these, like, properties that are like 400 plus grand or whatever it is in some parts of London. So I would say if you've got 6 figures, then you're definitely not going to be doing shared ownership.
No.
Unless you're going to go to Battersea and buy one of those, like, fancy flats, overlooking the river. But definitely, if you're going to do it so that you have a London salary and you're doing it outside of London. So, places like, I don't know, Essex or some sort of area where you can commute into London.
One of those commuter towns just outside of London. I think you're right, because I guess, I think the biggest difference in salaries to like values of properties in an area is probably London compared to the rest of like the UK. I'm sure, the average salary in other parts of the country are a lot closer to, or not, 10 times the average salary. They're a lot. It's a lot more doable. So I didn't even think of that, to be honest. And that's something I've seen in a few sort of comments that people are saying that they're not sure whether it's most appropriate in London. It seems to be like, I seem to get quite a few comments on some of the videos I've done with other shared ownership or shared owners who've had negative experiences, that they think it's better suited to properties outside of London. But yeah, so all right, I think you have some useful tips from your experience that I think you can share with prospective shared owners. So like, what tips would you give to somebody that's thinking about shared ownership if they commit to the scheme?
Yeah, so number one, don't buy a new build, because I said in the video that you pay a premium for the fact that it's brand new. I know a lot of the schemes are targeted at the new builds, but there is a website linked which is called Share to Buy, and that's actually where I found my flat. So on there, you get a whole range of properties across the whole country that are sort of secondhand or pre-lived in. So that's number one, and then number two, I would say overpay on your mortgage. Whatever amount that you can, just overpay. And it's fairly simple to set up an overpayment plan you just set up a standing order. And then number three, I know this is easy to say, but think about your career and how you can get more money, because, life just only gets more expensive. So if you're just going to be sitting in the same job, kind of not trying to get pay rises, then, you're going to be in top 3 tips.
Although it's easy to say that, like, you need to increase your salary, I think that is probably most likely, or that's probably the best way for you to be able to do it, because the way you're going to staircase, or the way you can leverage, the most money to actually staircase to 100% is through your salary, because whatever you earn, you should be able to get 4.5 times that, in a mortgage. And if you do that, that's gonna, get you a lot closer to staircasing than saving up a few grand every month, because that's only going to be it's only going to make up a small amount of the overall cost of sort of staircasing. So, and just in terms of overpaying with a mortgage, I think you can normally overpay by sort of 10%, can't you, with fixed rate mortgages? So check with your mortgage broker what is allowed, if anything's allowed. There are some mortgages where you can overpay by as much as you want. Those are usually sort of tracker mortgages. But yeah, just check what you're allowed to do before you sort of set up that standing order. But it's usually around 10% of what you normally pay. And I'll add in sort of the fourth tip is, if you can get a lodger, because that's
yeah,
such a great idea. Go for not a one bed sort of shared ownership flat. Try and go for a 2-bed flat, especially if you're a single person, and
yeah,
see whether you can actually get somebody in, you know,
yeah,
even if it's sort of as a lodger, sort of just contributing towards food and a bit of electricity or whatever, just to help
yeah.
you put more money away to actually staircase to 100%. So yeah,
Yeah, and
no.
actually, that is the way that I got my deposit, because if I didn't have a lodger, I definitely wouldn't have had
Mm-hmm.
20 grand to put down as a deposit. So that did really help.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing to bear in mind is that try and avoid like an increase in, spending, and, trying to
Mm-hmm.
live large, buying like, I don't know, expensive cars on leases and things like that. Just
Mm-hmm.
basically watch your money in order to be able to help you to staircase. Because I think one of the problems I find that I've seen with some people is that when they get on the shared ownership scheme, because relatively the amount that they're paying per month is not as high as they would be paying if they were renting.
Mm-hmm.
um, they feel comfortable in like, oh, I've got extra money
Mm-hmm.
to do X, Y, and Z. But actually, that it's a bit of a false economy by
Yeah.
thinking that because you're kind of saving a little bit on, your housing costs,
Mm-hmm.
then you can use the rest to do other, sort of things that, are kind of unnecessary.
I completely agree with you. I tell people this all the time, like not on my channel, but like in real life, I say like a budget is not a target amount to
Yeah,
spend.
yeah,
It's a limit on how much you should spend. Like if you could spend less than that, spend less than
yeah,
that. Just
that's right.
because you have, £500 available to you,
Yeah,
it doesn't mean you need to spend
yeah,
£500, you
that's
know?
right. Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah. And yeah, the
yeah,
more of that you can put away, like either
exactly.
into your mortgage or
Yeah,
into investments, I don't know, stocks and
yeah,
shares, or
yeah,
something else, just as savings. Like
yeah,
it may be money, well spent or better used than sort of
yeah,
actually spending it. So yeah, I think
yeah,
that's a really good tip.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Caroline, for
You're
joining me and
welcome.
talking to me about your experience.
Yeah, no
And
worries.
yeah, what's it called? I'll link to your channel also down in the description to this video.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Thanks. It's
Thank
really
you.
nice to talk
Cool.
to you, and I really enjoy your channel. So I've been watching quite a few videos, so it's quite interesting. Some of the tips that you give. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
appreciate that. Thank you.
great channel.
Thank you. Now that brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a like. And if you want to see the other videos that I've done on the shared ownership scheme or the interviews I've done with shared owners, then I'll provide some links on the screen now. Anyway, I hope you enjoy those videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.